Hey folks, back with another video. Let's dive into what stories got my attention the last week. Starting with Wuhan, China. Relatives of the Wuhan COVID-19 victim say that the Chinese authorities have banned them on social media. Relatives have banded together and they are clamoring for accountability from the the Beijing regime, and I fully support them in their quest for accountability, as I believe the Beijing regime definitely needs to be held accountable by their own people. Anyhow, the relatives have accused the authorities of silencing them. The authorities have told the relatives that they cannot talk to media, and that on top of it, the authorities have given people 5,000 yuan as condolence money. The relatives also fear that the Chinese authorities will mislead the World Health Organization experts who will be visiting the Wuhan to investigate what happened and regarding the whole pandemic. And I hope that the World Health Organization does. I wish them all the success in their investigation, and I hope the Chinese at least now should just come out clean. Because the longer they hide, it's going to be a bigger problem for them, both domestically and internationally. It is not good on so many levels. Anyhow, continuing on, but from a different angle on China, is the US China relation. Now, the US fleet had entered the South China Sea with a single USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier with its three warships in the Taiwan Straits water. Now, the US activity actually coincided with China's activity in the Taiwan Straits last Saturday, which the news came out in the last week. And the lucky for us in the broader world that the two activities were at minimum 250 nautical miles apart while this thing happened. The Chinese Foreign Ministry called the US move as not good for peace. And continuing on, it seems that the Biden nominee for UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, has pledged to work against the Chinese influence within her capacity as a diplomat, and I wish her luck to to use maximum diplomatic leverage and try to um, get the Chinese authorities to move away from their authoritarian and to take the path towards more liberty for its people. And we need to get the Chinese authorities to be less authoritarians and more cooperative and work with the international community. Now, continuing in that vein, the US Press Secretary Jen Psaki has indicated that the Biden administration will be tough on China. Now, as far as I've consistently said, as long as we in the West work towards building a credible threat, but with the aim primarily of using diplomacy and trying to get the Chinese authorities to um, modify their behavior by being less authoritarian, less tyrannical. I'm all for it, and that we should use the diplomatic channel, but we mustn't be too afraid to show that we will use the strength if necessary, and that we are going to. I think the strategy of building alliances, which would then pressure the Chinese government, and of course the local population will eventually also, and I think the realist within the Chinese administration will, the cooler heads will tell those hot heads to quit it before it's too late. And I think that strategy overall, I support that, trying to get their authorities to cool their head and not go further in this tyranny. Of course, the hotheads are still present, and it seems that the China's National People's Congress has approved a new Coast Guard law. Now, this allows their coast guards to board and inspect foreign vessels in their territories in South China Sea that they claim as theirs. They can fire on foreign vessels as well as demolish other claimant states' civilian and military structures. Now, in reaction to this, the U.S. State Department reaffirmed the U.S.'s 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty with the Philippines. One thing that I think it is important to remind ourselves is the fact that uh, China and the Philippines also have a border dispute in the South China Sea. So, I mean, while the United States is not, we can say, directly involved, but it is involved insofar as it has treaty obligations, giving itself just enough cover to say that they have some kind of, how should we put it, that they do have some kind of an interest in a broader sense. Anyhow, moving on, and of course, how can we move on from the topic of China when it seems to be one of the main topic of the week is the China versus Taiwan. Now, China warned the Taiwan's authorities after a recent stepped up military activities that, quote, independence means war. Now, China believes that Taiwan will formally declare independence from China. However, the Taiwan president Tsai Ing-wen said that Taiwan is independent, so I think the president killed two stones with one bird. On the one hand, they, you can say, sort of soften their fear that they will formally declare independence, but simultaneously saying that we are independent, we don't need to formally declare it. And it seems that both sides want to play in that sort of a gray zone. You know, they're it's a bit of a gray zone between the Chinese and the Taiwanese authorities. And of course, one must keep in mind the fact that Taiwan, the one company, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co., is world's largest foundry and producers of the semiconductors, and their semiconductors are used not just in uh, Taiwanese made goods, but in Japanese made goods, European made goods, and American made goods, and broadly, effectively, in all goods around the world. So I think there is definitely an interest, both from the perspective of, I think, I would assume the Chinese authorities, the regime in Beijing, along with, I think, the more broadly the more world, that they want to protect this sort of important, um, let's say, part of the production structure, that if it goes down, it will have much more deeper impact than just anything. Which I think overall is probably one of the reasons why the war, the, that we will continue to see some sort of a cold war rather than a hot war. We, I just hope that even the cold war remains within the diplomatic circle, that it doesn't get any kind of the last kind of cold war where there were few snipes here and there. I don't want a war. I want to avoid war as much as possible and work with diplomacy as much as possible. Use all our effort within that diplomatic sort of fold. Unfortunately, regimes that uh, as long as the Chinese authorities, I don't think the Chinese authorities will go for a hot war, but again, we need to, you know, it doesn't matter what we believe, we need to have, in my opinion, a credible deterrence. We must build that either way. It is irrelevant what we believe. We must be prepared for all situations. And of course, Hong Kong, which I believe was the thing that got everyone's attention from the start of, everyone is now looking towards Beijing with critical sort of viewpoint. And it seems that the UK government is prepared a new visa scheme that would cover as much as 2.9 million adults of Hong Kongers and their 2.3 million dependents. Now, the Beijing has said that they will not recognize the British National Overseas Passport as a legitimate traveling document. And they have called the British move as an infringement on their sovereignty. Now, of course, the British have accused the Beijing regime of violating the treaty that they signed with them with respect to Hong Kong, in which they were to guarantee the Hong Kongers uh, full liberties for at least 50 years, and that over the year of 50 years that they would figure out how they could live together. With the current kind of attitude that the regime in Beijing has, I think Hong Kong has every right to demand independence, and they should be independent if the people in Hong Kong want it. I am a big believer that of sovereignty for the individual primarily, but if a group of people want to secede, let's just say, then they should be allowed to secede. And I think Hong Kong can make a case that that they should be a separate country from China, and I would support them, and any other country anywhere else, not just in the case of China. This is my principle generally. If a group of people want to secede and they can reasonably secede, then yeah, more power to them, in my opinion. Moving on into our next story is the New Delhi story, the farmer protests. Now, the protesters recently stormed the Red Fort on India's Republic Day. Now, the farmers hoisted farm union and religious flags onto the pole where the Indian flag is usually where it rests. The During all this, it seems that the Republic Day parade continued without any problem as far as the parade is concerned. However, there was violence between the police and the farmers, and one protester died. One story said that he was run over by a tractor, making it an accident. Another story is that he was shot by the police. As of yet, I am not able to confirm one or the other story. However, 390 officers were reportedly injured in the whole incident, and it seemed that the police used baton and tear gas against the rioters. And in the whole incident, 200 people were arrested. Now, subsequently, Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India criticized and the whole incident on his radio broadcast. And he, of course, praised his law, the recent farmers' bill that he passed. Whatever the case, however it is, I, the I don't. As of this, I think the negotiation is the way forward. These protesters are not going to be. It's not good for both sides. It's gonna. I think protests that can turn riotous or that are where the probability of it turning into a riot is high, those kind of protests always backfire, and it's going to be bad not just for the government but also for the protesters. I just hope that the two sides can figure it out in how they're going to deal with this through negotiation and figure it out through negotiation, or else it's going to be, in my opinion, unnecessary violence will erupt out of this. Anyhow, moving on a little to the west, in Karachi, Pakistan, the Supreme Court released Ahmed Umar Saeed Sheikh, the main suspect for Daniel Pearl's abduction and murder in 2002. The Attorney General said that the authorities in Sindh will file a petition asking the Supreme Court to review their decision. However, the Pakistani and US officials have made no comments on the matter. It, the thing is that when it comes to countries like Pakistan or all these, South Asian and Middle Eastern countries, the rule of law it is very difficult, primarily because the system is very very corrupt and susceptible to corruption. On top of it is the fact that the investigations that they do, they're marred with so many um, sort of just systemical problems, and these countries across the Middle East, they need massive reforms because their systems are they were built like centuries, maybe even older, and that those systems need upgrading. They don't use sort of the up to date sort of systems that we have, that we in the West use. There is, it, it is easier. Their system is messed up. They need an overhaul of their whole system. In this case, even the judges said that there was lack of evidence. I mean, sure, I can believe that there definitely would have been lack of evidence, as because the people who work there, as far as I'm known, and I hear from other people, is the fact that the people who are supposed to do investigating, they don't usually do their job, and when they don't do their job, obviously that's going to hurt the whole system. That is their root problem. Anyhow, moving on over to our next story. In Tripoli, Lebanon, protests had turned into riot after a clash between police and protesters left one dead. Now, the protesters tried to storm a government building. The Lebanese Red Cross in the old incident said that they had transferred 35 wounded to the hospital, while 76 were treated at the site where they were. In all of this, the reports are that more than 200 people were injured. Now, Lebanon is going through all the problems. They have, not only is their system just messed up and just corrupt to the core. On top of it, they are in a economic crisis of their own making. It's not something that came from outside. They have made their own financial crisis with the kinds of, how should we say, the central bank policies that they have pursued. On top of it, I think the political environment is always fragile in Lebanon. There is a some kind of a balance that needs to shift. I believe they need to they need to work out a new kind of. They have to work through reforms. Their system definitely needs reform, and if the system doesn't get reforms in a short span of time, the whole country could collapse into a much worse crisis where there will be no system. It can just turn into how Afghanistan or Somalia has turned, where there is no government. The rule will be the strong man will rule through just pure violence, and That would be worse, not just for Lebanon, but that will have an impact across into the neighboring countries like Israel, Syria, and Turkey. I mean, Syria is already uh, very weak, and Turkey is already in somewhat of a turmoil. This could really hurt not just the Lebanese but the other countries in the region and much more. Moving on into uh, the region, in Tel Aviv, Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Aviv Kohavi announced new plans to strike Iran. Now, at the outset, I think the Israelis have got to let go of their obsession with Iran, and same goes for the Iranians. They need to let go of their obsession with Israel. They need to start working inside their own country and fix it instead of looking for these monsters in other countries. This is just not good for both the countries. Anyhow, he also warned Biden administration from entering the Iranian nuclear deal. I think the Iranian nuclear deal between the US and Iran is probably the only way forward, which will have the least amount of harm done. But I am for negotiation, and I believe that the nuclear deal, I'm sure it's not a perfect deal. No deal is going to be perfect, but on the whole, taking the positive and the negative, on the whole, it is a good deal. Anyone asking for a perfect deal is basically saying they don't want a deal. And of course, the Iranian president Hassan Rouhani's chief of staff said that, quote, the threats made by Israel are nothing but psychological warfare. Now, to an extent, I think I do agree that, the whole threats are really just psychological more than real. And a little positive, it seems that Kosovo will be establishing relations with Israel in, I believe today they will do, and they will formally announce it in a effectively like a Zoom call. Well, as I have been clear on this, I want all these Middle Eastern countries to start normalizing their ties with Israel. They need to quit hating the Israelis too much. No, I mean, I think they have the somewhat they are free to criticize Israeli policies towards the Palestinians and whatever. That's a separate issue, but they need to get rid of this particular. I'm. It's effectively like a not even borderline. This is effectively an irrational hate for Israel. I would urge that these authorities in the Middle East they need to quit using Israel as a existential excuse for their regime's existence. And that's all Israel is to the rest of the countries primarily, is that Israel is their excuse for for committing all kinds of atrocities over the people. And of course the people are there are people who understand this, and that anytime, this is a little inside secret, anytime somebody says we within these countries, somebody says we need to run, normalize, be friendly with Israel, they are accused of just about every heinous thing you could just think of. And that's it. The irrational hatred of Israel is a big part of why these Middle Eastern countries are stuck where they are stuck, both economically, socially, in all kinds of ways. Anyhow, moving on into our next story, the U.S. Saudi Arabia relations. Now, General Frank McKenzie, the head of the U.S. Central Command, revealed that the U.S. military is expanding operations in western parts of the kingdom. Now, currently, the U.S. and the Saudi sides are in negotiating a infrastructure project according to which they will build two ports and they will build two air bases. Now, the reason given for these ports and bases is the fact that the American bases in Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE are within the range of the Iranian missiles, which is obviously a fear of the U.S. Uh, army that if these bases get attacked, then they will not have any other bases close by that they could use. So they're using this particular one. But of course, the Biden administration has, in a separate news, has actually halted arms sales to Saudi Arabia and UAE for review. Now, it's not a big deal. Usually, when new administrations do come, it seems that a lot of these sales, specifically the arms sales, are halted to review, and this is because in part because the new administration has a different foreign policy from the old one, and so they do this halt review, and they want to see if the policy does not contradict the current policy that they want to pursue. I would assume they will halt it for some time. They're gonna do some, haggling over it, and they're gonna get back. The Saudis and the Emiratis are gonna get these arms sales after a bit of haggling with the new Biden administration. Anyhow, moving on over to our next story is a bit in the south in Washa, Yemen. Now, a airstrike at Washa last year left 9 women and children dead. Now, the Saudi-led coalition, up until now, has effectively never admitted to doing anything wrong. But in this case, after a investigative journalist went there and conducted their investigation, I believe, the Sky journalist, and it seems that the Saudis have, for the first time, did admit the mistake, but they blamed the weather. Now, I hope that this is, I'm going to take it in the most positive of all ways, is that maybe this is the time, this may be the indication that the Saudis may have, the top guys are probably going, okay, this war is gone too long. They can't see any victory in sight, and they need to come out against this war because the war is bleeding their finances dry. Uh, and there's only so much finances the Saudis can uh, spare before it's going to cause bigger problem. And so maybe, hopefully, this is a good sign that maybe the war in Yemen may be coming to an end, because if the Saudis are going to admit that they've made a mistake, it might be that they're admitting to much more behind the scenes. So, fingers crossed. I hope the war in Yemen ends as soon as possible. If I were them, I would have ended it like the day before it even started. Anyhow, moving on into our next story in Ethiopia. Now, accusations of war crimes are emerging. Now, when the whole thing was happening last year, I mean, it's kind of normal for the wars to have some amount of war crimes, and I expected that there was going to be. I expected something different. I expected the war to last longer, that the Tigrayan people would have fought much longer, but it seemed that the war ended effective in about a month. But I did expect that there was going to be some kind of war crimes, and it seems accusations of rape have emerged. In fact, not just rape during the war, it seems that rapes are continuing up till now, which is after the war, which is something I didn't expect, and I didn't think that would have happened. And anyhow, the UN has urged all sides to have a zero tolerance policy on war crimes, which I mean, it's everyone says that they're against war crimes. In fact, even Tai Atske Selesi, Ethiopia's ambassador to UN, said Ethiopia has a zero tolerance on war crimes. Now, the Ethiopian government, as far as I know, haven't specifically said anything on this. If I could give any advice to the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, it would be this: he should announce that he would hold a proper, full investigation into these war crimes, and he will punish those who have committed the war crimes in this case. It's a simple, it is, there's nothing complicated for him to do here. All he has to stand up is say, I'm doing this for the good of the country by punishing the wrongdoers. It doesn't matter. He could have said, he can just clearly say that I went against the Tigrayan people because they were wrong. I'm gonna go against these people because if they are wrong, they should be punished. It's it's a simple pitch. He doesn't even need to give a long speech. He could just stand on top of that hill known as justice. Anyhow, moving into our next story, in Mandera County, Kenya, there was a roadside bomb by Al Shabaab. Now, in the casualties was a one soldier was killed and three Kenyan soldiers were killed. Now, of course, Kenya is uh, basically at war with Al Shabaab, which is a terrorist organization that is, I believe, their headquarters is effectively, no, I think their headquarters is in Somalia. They operate from Somalia, and Al Shabaab is at war, is a terrorist organization and is at war both inside Ethiopia. It does all kinds of terrorist activities there. It does terrorist activities in Kenya because the Kenyans don't tolerate terrorists. Good for them. And I wish Kenya all the luck in their war against Al Shabaab, the terrorist. And hopefully, this terrorism that is plaguing the Muslim countries across the globe ends soon. It has done far more damage. In fact, it has only done damage. There hasn't been any good from this. Anyhow, moving on to our next story. In Tunisia, there a new anti-government protests have emerged. Now, people in hundreds marched in Tunis. Not a massive protest, but a protest nonetheless. And there were scuffles between protesters and security personnel in this. Now, I will continue to look into this story and see if this protest flares up or if it just fizzles out. But a lot of people in Tunisia, in fact, all over Tunisia, believe that their situation is effectively they're back exactly where they started when they started the Arab Spring. And if those people are right, then I expect that, I mean, there have been protests continuously, and I think these protests are going to be here for some time. I would urge their government to work with the people, and it is difficult, sure, to work with the people for the government, but you don't have any other choice. Tunisian government, in fact, all the governments in the Middle East, if you want to rule over people, you got to listen to them, and you got to work. You need to listen to them, hear their concerns, and you need to tell them what you will do, give them a time frame, do what you can, and if you don't, you're going to be out, just like your previous dictator, Zainal Abidin bin Ali. Moving on into our next story, the Central African Republic. The the the, the war between the government and the rebels has escalated over the election results of the elections that were held last year, and it seems that about 200,000 people have fled. As of yet, it has been The numbers are that 92,000 people have fled to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and 13,000 have fled to Cameroon, Chad, and the Republic of Congo combined. Now, there's also the because of all this fleeing and other things, they're saying that diseases are becoming rampant in the population, all kinds of diseases, and there is even stories such as that people are trading sex for food, and of course that is just going to further complicate the whole situation there. And this is what war does. It happens, but then its results are unpredictable. If two sides continue to fight, it impacts those people who are not fighting but who are nearby to do to flee. And it is, I think, the Central African Republic and the rebels are both at fault, and they need to work this out. They need to end the war as soon as possible, or else it's just going to turn into another mess, much bigger mess. It already is much bigger mess for them to handle. If they continue, it's going to get far more worse. And my thoughts and prayers to these people. I wish them all the luck they can get, because it's the innocent people who get the most hurt in all wars. The standard, the last time I heard, is for every soldier that dies in a conflict, there are 10 innocents who also die. Anyhow, moving on to the next story is the Moscow, Russia. Now, Moscow police raided apartments and offices of Alexei Navalny, and in their raid, they arrested Oleg Navalny, brother of Alexei Navalny. Now, Alexei Navalny was also sentenced to a 30 days in jail, I think on Thursday, after he was arrested by the court. Now, the protest in response planned to protest across in 80 cities on Sunday, which to me feels like it may be maybe they have learned the lesson of protesting the protesters from Belarus, and I don't know, maybe we could see weekend protests happening in Russia. However, on the protest day, the numbers come out that more than 4,500 people were arrested across the country. 1,450 were arrested in Moscow, and 860 were arrested in St. Petersburg, which has been reported as of yet. On a separate news, it seems that Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin voiced satisfaction over extending the New START with the agreement, which is the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. And, in fact, President Vladimir Putin, in fact, signed the START Treaty in this week as well. So, that is good. And in a bigger context, I think the START Treaty is the only treaty between the two sides as of yet that the both sides that controls the nuclear arms, which is good. But on the other hand, the protests, I think the Russian government needs to figure out what they need to. The Russian government has to listen to the concerns of the protesters, and either do the whatever reforms they ask, or give them a reason why those reforms cannot happen. You cannot, and I think they have the right to protest, and as long as they are protesting, and I think the Russian authorities shouldn't arrest people for just protesting. They should arrest them for other crimes. for actual crimes. Anyhow, moving on into Rome, Italy, turmoil in the country, which seems to be the norm for Italy. Former Prime Minister Matteo Renzi has pulled his party, the Italia Viva Party, out of the government coalition, resulting in the Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte to resign. Now, President Sergio Mattarella has accepted the resignation and has given Robert Fico, who is head of the lower house, the task to hold talks amongst the ruling parties and facilitate a new government in 4 days. If not, there could be new elections in the near future in Italy. Now, in the case of Italy, Italy is in my opinion, turmoil for a number of reasons. They have economic problems. There's the whole. I think the thing is that with Italy, their main problem is the financial as of yet, coupled with some governance issue that have over the years I have seen that they are having. And I wish the government all the luck, but they got to do some reforms there, both financial and legal reforms, if they want to come out of this. Anyhow, I hope the new government, if it forms, or if the new elections that happen, I wish the Italian people all the luck for the future. Moving on into Warsaw, Poland, protests erupted against Poland's top court decision which effectively bans abortion. Now, in the whole protest, no violence was reported, which, in my opinion, is good on the protesters for having a protest without violence. And of course, they have the right to protest. And this, in my opinion, was an ideal protest where there was no violence. However, the decision for banning of abortion does include a few exceptions, namely if a woman's health is in jeopardy or if the pregnancy is due to criminal activity such as rape or incest. Personally, my own view is that the government should neither ban it nor even permit it. I think when it comes to these kind of issues, it is really should be between the doctor and the patient. I mean, because this is a much more it is a much more complex issue. There are nuances in this issue. There is no one size fits all when it comes to abortion because there are a number of reasons and as to why an individual might um, go for an abortion. All in all, I would urge that you know both sides to come up with a more of a solution that will be suitable for both sides. Anyhow, like I said, it is a complicated issue. That's just my opinion on it. Of course, my opinion is just mine. Neither. If you agree, I'm happy. If you disagree, I'm fine. Whatever your side of the whatever you think, you can write in the comment section, and I will read. Anyhow, moving on into Germany. Now, the Federal Court of Justice in Germany has ruled that the members of the Foreign Army who are residing in Germany may face trials over war crimes. Now, this includes officers of foreign states, foreign army, and secret services. Now, from the face of it, I think the German court has made a good decision. I just hope that I mean, the devil is in the details. So I think I'm gonna give it some time and see how this plays out. because currently there is two Syrian individuals who are in German courts who have been alleged to have committed war crimes, and this court decision will allow the German courts to prosecute the case against them. Personally, I think the German court system is robust, and it's a it's a just court system. You know, not perfect, but I think it is just. The threshold for me for it being just is, I think it is. Anyhow, moving on over to our next story is the Netherlands. The protests continue across the country, something I reported last week. In this protest, 200 people were arrested. 184 of them were arrested for rioting, and the protesters had looted supermarkets. They had destroyed window shops, and there were even hospitals that were attacked. Now, as far as the protest part of this thing is concerned, I think the protesters are protesting against the government's overstepping as far as the lockdown rules are concerned. And they are protesting, and they believe, and I think they somewhat rightly believe, that the government has done something that they do not have the right to do, and that they are setting up a precedent that is dangerous for future. I agree with them on that. The protesters, however, the rioters, them destroying supermarkets, them destroying hospitals, they should be arrested and prosecuted to the max for damages. They should be prosecuted and punished appropriately to the law. And I believe the Dutch court system is also, like their German neighbors, pretty good and robust, if more or less. I would urge that the protesters continue to. Oh, let me see. Let me rephrase that. I would urge that the protesters do protest, but they shouldn't. They should protest in a way which will cause minimum damage. I think I would encourage them to write letters both to their elected members as well as to their local newspapers. They should voice their concerns. They should, how should we say, they need to clearly say exactly what it is that they are concerned about and make the best case for them, and continue to influence the general populace to their particular point of view, and explain to them why they are protesting. That, I think, would be more effective. That would be more just, and it would also be the one with the least damages to other people's property. Anyhow, it seems that the protest against lockdown has spread into their neighboring Belgium. Now, demonstrations were shut down outside the central stations in Brussels. 200 people were arrested as well, weirdly enough, just like in Netherlands. And the protests were actually in response to the Belgian government's new restriction imposing night curfews on the people. Now, again, protesters have every right to, and I think in this case they haven't even done any damages. So I think in this case the people arrested were they should be subsequently, whatever their process is, make sure that they didn't have any like reasonably they figure out that they weren't there for causing any kind of problem, because in recent times the media in particular has blurred the line between good protesters and bad protesters. And also somehow there are good rioters and bad rioters, which is, I don't understand how. Protest There's no such thing as a good protester or a bad protester. The protesters, as far as long as they're just protesting and within the capacity of protesting, they're good. What their concern, their grievances, maybe their grievances is right, maybe their grievances is wrong, that is irrelevant, that is beside the point. The There is in fact no excuse for rioting or rioting by any side, in my opinion. And I think even by the law is wrong. Nothing justifies rioting. Anyhow, moving on to our next story. The last story of this presentation is the GameStop. Now, before I talk about the GameStop, I thought it would be important to get a little background of what happened. So here is a little background to this. Now, the numbers are not strictly speaking um, completely accurate. They are the closest approximation because I wanted to lay out a general picture of what happened. So as you can see, in fact, I didn't put, but on the 1st of January, the stock price for GameStop was actually trading at about just under $20, round about that neighborhood. So between the 1st and the 20th, 21st, in fact, January, there effectively the stock price doubled. Now, in 20 days, if a stock price doubles, you know, you can sort of go, okay, something is not right. But then from 21st to the 27th, the stock price just kept going up from the lower end of 37. Well, on the 21st, it was trading between 37 and 43 US dollars, and on 27th, it was trading between 249 and $371. Each day, the lower price was increasing by each day. The lowest it hit was always higher than the last day. And as you can see in the presentation, on the 28th, and the lowest was 126, but on the 28th, it actually peaked at about 468. I think it went a little more above that. That's beside the point. But as you can see, the GameStop stock just went skyrocketed in just like a week. Well, not week, but like you understand, like within 10 days, it just peaked at 468. Now, seeing all this, the Securities and Exchange Commission announced that they are monitoring the situation with other regulators. Now, the media and broadly has dubbed this as a Reddit rally. Turns out that there was a subreddit group by the name of Wall Street Bets, and there was even a Discord channel, I think it was a similar name, where there was a frenzy. They just all said buy, and they all just kept buying the stock, and it just kept going up. And by the way, this on top of it, it wasn't just GameStop. There were other stocks who were also whose stock values went up, including in them was the AMC, the Nokia, BlackBerry, and various other stocks. Now, I heard lots of rants as well as bants on the whole GameStop. There was one particular thing that a lot of people are not talking about, which is that this particular thing, what happened to GameStop and various other stocks like the aforementioned and more, are that they are a symptom of something bigger. Now, what do I mean by they are a symptom? Well, they are a symptom because in the year 2020, the Federal Reserve's M1 money stock, which was at about 4 trillion US dollar in the beginning of the year, went to as high as 6.8 trillion dollars. That is effectively, in some sense, you could say that's an increase of around like 60-70% within a year. And that increase, that thing is now trickling into the economy. And that expansion of the monetary base, which was then used to monetize the checks that were issued by the US government for the coronavirus, where people got their $600 checks. People got that money and they just had to spend. And then where they spent it? They spent it on stocks. And lo and behold, you got people who have this money spending their money however they see fit into the stocks. And I expect that there are going to be so many more stocks that are going to show exactly these kind of signs. And personally, I am debating whether we're going to have hyperinflation coming forward, or are we going to have a stagflation. Now, as of yet, I think there's going to be stagflation. There's not going to be hyperinflation. Although, if I see more data over the time, and if the data to me, after reading it, to me looks like hyperinflation, I would say. But as of yet, I think there's going to be stagflation coming in the coming weeks and months. And Gamestop is not the only stock. Expect more stocks to behave like Gamestop in the coming weeks, months. In simple words, welcome to the clown decade. Anyhow, that's it for this video. If you like the video, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for future updates. Write in the comment sections your thoughts, criticisms, and anything I might have missed. And I will see you in the next video.